What's going on, everyone? Happy Friday. We are just a little over 24 hours away from kickoff at Williams-Brice Stadium in a pivotal Week 3 matchup between South Carolina and number 16 ranked LSU. For South Carolina, the Gamecocks are 2-0 to start this year, and they're looking to move to 3-0 to start a season for the first time since 2012. But to do that, they're going to have to beat a very good LSU team. And this Tiger Bunch has lost one game already this year. The Bayou Bengals lost their season opener in Las Vegas against Southern Cal over 2 weeks ago. And Brian Kelly's squad, they need to get off to a good start in SEC play. And if they're going to do so, they got to go into Columbia on the road. It's going to be tough, loud environment. College game day is going to be in town, and they got to win this game to get off to a good start in SEC play. So before all the action begins on Saturday morning, wanted to break down a little bit of offensive player projections from our new friends and sponsor over at PrizePicks. So if you don't know much about PrizePicks is the largest independently owned daily fantasy sports platform in all of North America. They're the easiest, most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. It's just you against the numbers. So instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, you pick more or less than on 2 to 6 players' stat projections. And then, of course, you watch the winnings roll in. PrizePicks has quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types. It's what makes PrizePicks the #1 daily fantasy sports app. I've had a lot of experience using PrizePicks in the past, and I can confidently say it is a great platform to use for this sort of thing. And I've done it in the past with college football, NFL, baseball, basketball. It makes the watching sports experience so much more engaging to me, and this is the perfect way to do so. So if you're interested, just go to prizepicks.com or download the PrizePicks app, and you can use the code on our screen right now, GC, which stands for Gamecock Central, to receive a guaranteed $50 once you play $5 in lineups. And we want to welcome PrizePicks to the Gamecock Central family. And so without further ado, let's get into all the offensive player projections for this week. And right off the bat, we have Lenor Sanders, South Carolina's redshirt freshman quarterback, and he's got some good projections here. So with him, his passing yards number is currently sitting at 175.5, so more or less than that number. His rushing yards are 29.5. Then his passing plus rush yards is at 215.5. And then interceptions, it's more or less than half. So with Sellers, he had a pretty good game last time out against Kentucky. I thought he played fairly well. He didn't run the football a ton, only 7 carries, and he finished with negative yards. And then his passing numbers were pretty good. I mean, you look at the stats, he went 10 of 14 passing for 166 yards, completed 71.4% of his passes. 2 touchdowns. He did have an interception, and he did get sacked a handful of times. Not that bad, though, because I thought despite some lack of production or lack of protection at times, I thought he was very good, and he was an accurate passer last Saturday in Lexington. And so with him, I think he's going to have another good game here. I'm not saying he's going to go off for 300 yards or anything like that, but I do feel like with him, he can definitely be a guy that, depending on how accurate he is, depending on if his receivers can get open and create space like they did last week, you could see this be more than for this projection. At the same time, though, it is still early in the year, and I think Sellers is still getting his feet wet as quarterback for this team, taking over after Spencer Rattler was at the helm for the last 2 years. But I do think he can certainly get more than on it, but we're going to have to see. And then for his rushing yards, that's a little more tough because, again, 2 weeks ago against Old Dominion, he ran 22 times for 68 yards, was running a lot more. And I think that had to do with the fact that whenever the pocket collapsed, he was off and running. Whereas last week against Kentucky, if the pocket collapsed, he stepped up and made some big throws. So I don't see him, unless he just has a lane and he takes it for big yardage, I don't see him having more than the 29.5 rushing yards, because I do feel like he's going to be a little bit more poised in the pocket and making some throws, which leads me to believe in his passing yard numbers. However, like I said, if he does have a lane and has some space, I could definitely see that being the case. And interceptions, to win this game, South Carolina is going to have to protect the football and not turn it over. And the thing with him is, for interceptions, he had one last week. He didn't have any in week 1. I think he's going to be able to protect the football and have less than on the interception totals. And then our next player we're going to go ahead and talk about is running back Raheem Rocket Sanders. So with Rocket, his projection this week is 68.5 rushing yards. So it'll be more or less than on that total. And with Rocket, he didn't have the best game last week, but it certainly wasn't bad by any means. You look back at Old Dominion, he had 24 carries for 88 yards, averaged 3.7 yards on the ground, had a touchdown, and he was very good in that week one performance. Really can't complain about it. This is his first game back from the injuries he's had previously in the past, recovering this offseason. And then fast forward to Kentucky, he actually did go more than on his projection, which I believe was set at 52 and a half rushing yards. But against that Wildcat defense, which was very tough, he had 13 carries for 54 yards, averaging 4.2 yards per rush. And I thought last week it really was not, like I said, his best performance, but it certainly wasn't bad by any means. I think he picked it up in the second half. And I think the thing with him was he's able to make plays happen on his own. Like, I've said it before and I'll say it again. You look back at, like, for instance, a 3rd-and-1 play last week in the second half on the Joshua Simon touchdown catch. A few plays before that, it's 3rd-and-1, it's 3rd-and-1, and he gets a big run and he just breaks off the edge and goes for a big gain and eventually scored a touchdown. I shouldn't say it was Josh Simon because that was previously before, but Rocket Sanders eventually pummeled into the end zone from 6 yards out, and he's just a very big, hard to take down type of running back, in my opinion. And with this being a really big game where you need your offense to show up, I think this is the week where we're going to see someone from South Carolina just have a massive game. And I think for South Carolina to win, it's got to be Rocket, right? I think he's definitely going to soar over this projection. He's going to get more than. And I definitely think we're waiting for him to – he's been good so far. We're waiting for him to be great. I think what great looks like to me is more than 100 rushing yards. I think he can get over that or more than that for sure, but we're going to have to see. I do believe a lot in him, and I think if he gets enough protection up front, I think he can be a very dangerous threat in the run game for South Carolina. All right, and now we're going to go ahead and dive into South Carolina's wide receiver projections for this week, courtesy of PrizePicks. And with Vandrevius Jacobs to start out here, he has only one projection for this week. It's more than or less than half of a rushing or receiving touchdown. So he basically, to put it into simple form, he just needs a touchdown of some sort this week. And he will finish with more than what his projection says. And it's a demon. So that means you're getting more bang for your buck when you choose to use this projection on PrizePicks. And so it's a curious one because you go back to 2 weeks ago against Old Dominion. He had 2 catches for 59 yards, had a long of 41, but then you go to Kentucky last week. He didn't get a single target, which is kind of crazy because he played the second most snaps at receiver for South Carolina. And you would think, okay, he's going to build off this game. I personally thought that was going to be the case with him, but he just never got the ball. And so how do you go about this projection this week? I think it's a little bit of a toss-up because South Carolina still doesn't have a surefire number one receiver. And I know Jared Brown, who we'll talk about here in a second, and Mazio Bennett had good games last week, but that's not a lock that they're going to be the top pass catchers again this week. It seems like they will be, but how does Vandrevius Jacobs fit into all this? And I think it really just depends on how often South Carolina is getting into the red zone on Saturday against LSU. If they're getting in there a good bit and Sellers is throwing the ball really well and Jacobs is on the receiving end of some of those catches, I think you could lean towards this. But for me, just because there's so many uncertainties right now, the fact that he didn't get a single target last week was kind of concerning to me. And it's not a bad thing by any means. That just means there were other receivers open. And sometimes with a by committee receiving room, everyone's got to eat, and it's going to depend on the week. And so maybe this is Dre Jacobs' week to really shine here. But for me, because they've got Jared Brown and Mazio Bennett, like I said, that really had solid games last week, and especially the fact that I'm believing that South Carolina is going to run the football pretty well this weekend. I'm going to lean towards maybe less than, though it wouldn't shock me if Sellers just hits him up in the end zone and he makes a nice catch. That it's just you never know. But I will say, for me at least, I'm going to go with less than on it. And then our last player to talk about here, as I alluded to, is Jared Brown, who has two projections this week, just like Jacobs. He has got more or less than on half rushing and receiving touchdowns. So, like I said before, it is a demon play, but he just needs one touchdown of any sort to get on the board here. And then with another projection from Brown, it is going to be 38 and a half receiving yards. So more or less than that number there. So let's start out with the touchdowns, because with him, I think it's a little bit more of an easy choice because look at what he did last week. He had 4 catches for 50 yards, and he also had some rushing numbers too. He had 1 carry for 11 yards. So I know South Carolina's been using him in a little bit of that jet sweep action, and that was something that also happened against Old Dominion, where he didn't have any catches or receptions or anything like that. He did have some targets, but couldn't haul any in. And then he did have a rushing carry for 16 yards against the Monarchs. So I do think with him, it's a little easier to go ahead and say, like, hey, this guy, he's getting the ball for South Carolina, and he can definitely be a guy that if he creates space, Sellers is going to throw the ball to him. I think that is the case for any of these receivers, and they already have that connection from last week. So I think Sellers being a young quarterback, he's going to put his trust in his reliable targets that he has, like Bennett and Brown and Jacobs. If he can get him involved this week, we're going to have to see. But I think for Brown, it's definitely something where I could see him getting more than both of these projections. And it really, like I said with Jacobs, it depends on if South Carolina is able to get down into the red zone. If he's going to score a touchdown, you could see some jet sweep action. You also could just see a receiving touchdown. So I would feel a little bit more confident in both of those projections. And so that's going to do it for all the offensive player projections this week for South Carolina and their matchup against LSU this weekend. Again, if you want to get involved, you can go to prizepicks.com or download the PrizePicks app and use the code GC, that stands for Gamecock Central, to receive a guaranteed $50 once you play $5 in lineups. Again, I will say it again, I think this is a great opportunity. I've loved using PrizePicks in the past, and another reason why I love using PrizePicks is for opportunities like this. Caleb Williams, Chicago Bears, rookie quarterback. I know he didn't have the best game against the Tennessee Titans last week, threw for less than 100 yards passing. All he needs this week, if you want to go ahead and use this, combine it with any of your Gamecock players that you'd like to use on PrizePicks. All you need from Caleb is 1 yard to win. It is a great offer promotion for Free Square September from PrizePicks. Highly suggest it. This is just another reason, like I said, why I love using PrizePicks, and definitely would recommend it. So again, South Carolina kicks off against number 16 LSU at noon on ABC on Saturday. College Game Day will be in town live at Gamecock Park at 9 a.m. on Saturday morning. And if you can't be there, it's on ESPN. And then the games begin. And this is a huge matchup for both teams, like I said. So that's all for now. Have a great weekend, guys, and stay safe while out at the game.